Chapter 7. Addison woke up the next morning with a small smile on her face. She had slept really well and felt rested. She moved a bit and frowned as she felt resistance against her stomach and on her arm. Slowly she opened her eyes. The room was in pleasant obscurity for her fragile eyes upon awakening, and she yawned, trying to chase away the last traces of sleep. Her gaze fell on Wyatt, who was still sleeping soundly in his chair, and suddenly she remembered the evening yesterday. She looked down to see Willa still clinging to her like she was a lifeline and the wolf was drowning. Addison smiled, and with her free hand, the other trapped in Winter's iron embrace that had moved overnight to get to her side, and gently stroked her hair, freeing it from her face. Willa frowned, before relaxing again. Slowly the young girl freed herself from the embrace of the two wolves, straightening up to see the luminous numbers of her alarm. She had woken up earlier than usual, and took the opportunity to prepare in advance and give a little surprise to her favorite wolves. She stood up, disturbing the two wolves, who fortunately just yawned and turned to the other side, and slowly tiptoed out of her room, knowing their hearing was super sensitive. Her parents had to go to work early today, so she had the kitchen to herself, and she planned to make good use of the hour and a half she had saved to bake some pastries. Nothing too fancy, just a few chocolate muffins. She remembered that in her letters Willa had told her how much Wyatt loved Morris, so she knew chocolate wasn't a problem for them. She busied herself with making a decent breakfast, knowing that she would have to wake the wolves a little earlier so they could go home to change. She should also make some to take away, so the other wolves and pups can get a bite of it. A prayer that they all have a good day, in a way. She took out all the necessary ingredients for the muffins and put on an apron to avoid staining her cheerleader outfit. At the same time, she put the bacon and the eggs in the frying pan. Gradually, the kitchen began to smell like bacon and eggs, with a faint smell of chocolate on top. It was already salivating Addison, who took the muffins out of the oven and had a hard time not tasting them, but she didn't want to burn herself on the day of her captain's test. She set the tray on the counter and let them cool while she prepared a platter. She put the bacon and egg plates on it, added bread and toast, then put the muffins on a plate and added them to the mix. She grabbed the orange juice and put 4 glasses on the tray before taking everything delicately so as not to spill anything, and slowly went up to her room. The wolves were still asleep like wolf pups, and Addison smiled as she set the tray down on her vanity. She picked up her phone and photographed them. It will be her little secret. Then she walked over to Willa first and gently shook her shoulder. The wolf whimpered a little, but finally opened one eye and smiled when she saw Addison. Morning, Addison smiled, stroking her hair. Willa just gave a cute little howl before yawning and stretching all her limbs. Then she seemed to realize where she was, for her eyes widened and stood up with a start. "Hey, calm," Addison whispered, touching her shoulder. Addison. Tan. She looked around and saw Winter and Wyatt still asleep. Then her gaze fell on the tray before returning to her. "You fell asleep yesterday. Winter followed you after a few minutes, then Wyatt must have watched over us until he fell asleep himself. I made breakfast," she said simply to her silent question. "My pack. You had already done your rounds before leaving, right? I know you wouldn't take any chances, so you should be fine. Although we will have to find an excuse as to why you didn't come home that night." Addison smiled at her and ruffled her hair. "I'll wake up Winter and Wyatt. You can get ready in my bathroom if you want. I should have new toothbrushes in the closet. Serve yourself." Willa nodded, climbed out of the blanket before heading to the adjoining bathroom. Addison then turned to Winter, who had sunk deeper into the bed, making Addison laugh. She took another photo. She was sure Wyatt would love to see it. Addison ran a hand through her buns that had come undone overnight, pulling out a moan from the wolf, who tried to escape it. Addison leaned down and whispered in her ear. "Winter, you have to wake up. Come on, little wolf." She moaned a little more before opening her eyes and looking into Addison's. She straightened up slowly, rubbing her eyes, before examining her surroundings the same way Willa had done. Her eyes lit up when she saw the breakfast tray, before she frowned at not seeing her alpha. Her nose twitched, and Addison watched in fascination as she turned to the bathroom, and her muscles relaxed. "Their sense of smell is truly incredible," she marveled. "Slept well?" Winter turned to her, and she let out the same little howl Willa had earlier. I'm going to make a guess and say that that means good morning. Addison laughs. I slept very well, Winter replied in a small voice. Say the tray. It's our breakfast, with a little surprise. At the same time, Willa came out of the bathroom, a big smile on her lips and looking much more awake. Addison pointed at the tray before walking over to the seat where Wyatt was sleeping. She winced at the awkward position he was in and decided that if the wolves were going to continue their nocturnal visit, to plan something to prevent it. Wyatt, she whispered. She only received a small moan in return, so she decided to come a little closer and shake his shoulder to stimulate him. She barely had time to drop her hand delicately so as not to surprise him when she was pulled forward sharply and landed on Wyatt's lap. He had buried his head in her neck, inhaling her scent and tickling her when his nose passed over her skin. Almost instinctively, she carries her other hand, the one that was not placed in the wolf's, in her hair, stroking the small strands at the base of his neck and pulling out a few moans from him. Wyatt mumbled something she didn't understand, but the sound was enough to bring her out of her amazement. She heard the bathroom door open and Winter come out, and remembered that they weren't alone. She blushed to the roots of her hair before clearing her throat. Wyatt? Wake up, she whispered. A moan and a blink later, and the wolf's chocolate eyes plunged into hers. He smiled tenderly at her before frowning at her embarrassment. He looked around and his eyes widened as he realized their position. By the moon, Addison, I'm sorry. He let go of her, allowing her to stand up. Addison still had a red face, but she gave him a small smile. It's okay, don't worry. Do you want to freshen up before eating? He noticed the tray Willa and Winter were already serving themselves in, nodded, smiling, and rushed into the bathroom. Addison's arms dangled before shaking her head and heading to breakfast. She ignored Willa and Winter's smiles and helped herself. Hey Addison, what is this? Winter asked, pointing at the muffins. Chocolate muffins, Addison smiles, helping herself to one. At the word chocolate, they rushed on it. Addison smiled at their excitement and vowed to do it more often if it made them so happy. They moaned in pleasure as they took another one, and the three girls chatted a bit, until Wyatt came up behind Willa and stole her cookie before biting into it. He froze for a moment. Chocolate. Addison let out a small chuckle and nodded, giving him another while she just drank her orange juice. She loved having them with her, and she hoped they could make up for all the years they had lost. I also made some for the pack if you want to bring them some. She pointed to the box next to the tray. Thank you, Addison, you didn't have to, said Willa, a little smile on her lips. I know, but it made me happy. Really. Speaking of the pack, what are we going to tell them? Winter asked. The other three wolves turned to her, Wyatt's face already full of chocolate. I mean, we spent the night outside the den and we reek of Addison's scent. Good question, whispered the young girl. Why not just tell them the truth? I admit that I'm not very keen on continuing the game of lies. But it's your grandma Winona who told us to hide the fact that we knew each other, contradicts Willa. And I can't make you lie to your pack, Willa. You are their alpha, the ones they trust more than anything. Willa was silent for a moment, doubt visible in her eyes. Addison understood what she was feeling. On the one hand, her grandmother had warned them to never tell anyone about their relationship, and on the other, she couldn't help but think that she was betraying her family. Addison put a hand on his shoulder. Maybe I have a solution, Wyatt said at last. The three young girls turned to him, and he struck up a silent conversation with Willa. The gaze game lasted a few seconds before Willa exclaimed, No, Wyatt, absolutely not. Simon, Willa, the members of the pack already believe it, and you know the prophecy like me. And then, maybe it really is her. It's impossible, Wyatt. She have a moonstone for years now, we would know if she was. A moonstone that is not charged. Addison looked from brother to sister, like a tennis match, before turning to Winter. What are they talking about? What are they talking about? Winter jumped and turned to her, completely panicked. She twisted her fingers and refused to meet Addison's gaze. She only felt more confused. What could the twins be talking about that would make Winter so nervous? The wolf finally turned to Willa and Wyatt, who, despite their yellow eyes and sticking fangs, were still adorable with the chocolate around their mouths. Addison smiles. They were indeed brother and sister. "Willa, maybe it's true, said the young wolf in a small voice. Willa's eyes flashed in her direction, and Winter whimpered as she shriveled up a bit. The alpha seems to realize the force of her gaze, for she calmed down straight away and sighed. "Wyatt, imagine that you are right and that she is the girl of prophecy. Would you really like to give her the necklace and condemn her to be ill?" It seemed to freeze Wyatt in a long silence. He let out a long sigh and ran a hand through his already messy hair. "You are right, but you can't deny that the resemblance is incredible." "It's true." Willa turned to Addison and gave her a small smile. Addison knew she wouldn't have any information at this time, and despite her curiosity, she accepted his implied decision not to tell her at this time. When she felt ready, she knew Willa would tell her what she needed to know. "But we can use that reason," Wyatt finished. "You could say that we were watching her, or that we were watching her parents, in case they knew where the Moonstone is. They are practically the rulers of the city after all." "I can ask my parents," Addison reacts. "They should know something. After all, Moonstone is kind of a source of energy, right?" Willa and Wyatt exchanged a look before shaking their heads. "Don't take it the wrong way, Addie, but I don't really trust your parents," Willa said cautiously, not wanting to upset her friend. To her surprise, Addison nodded, with a sad little smile on her lips. "Understandable. I admit that I don't trust them myself." She glanced at the alarm clock on her bedside table and swore. "You'd better leave, if you want to go to your den before going to school. We're already late." She gave them the box of muffins for the other pack members and started to walk to her bedroom door, thinking they were going to follow her. She whirled around when she heard her window open and almost screamed in horror when she saw Willa jump over it. Winter followed her shortly after, but Wyatt hesitated for a moment. He turned to her and quickly approached her. "See you soon." He leaned over her, and Addison thought she was dreaming as she felt lips as light and soft as butterfly wings touch her cheek. Before she could blink, Wyatt was already by the window and leaping over it, refusing to meet her gaze. Addison sat down in the chair the wolf had used for sleeping, her cheeks as red as a tomato. What had just happened? Chapter 8. But I don't understand why they want to demolish it. To build another cheerleading space. This power plant is our story. It tells about the creation of zombies. Eliza went silent when Emma and Gregoire, their history teacher, passed by them. They were supposed to discuss the positive aspects of the destruction of the power plant and the construction of the new cheerleading center. It was a method of their government to silence the protests that Eliza started. "I know, Eliza, but everything will be ready soon. I have no idea how we could stop the demolition of the power plant in such a short time," Addison replied with a sigh. "But a cheerleading center? We already have 3, not counting the gymnasium. Without wanting to offend you, Addison, cheerleading is not going to bring us more." Addison sighed again. She agreed with Eliza. No matter how much she loved cheering, she knew that unless she decided to become a pro, it would not bring her anything for her future. And even if she did become a pro, she only had 30 years before she had to stop. They would need a place that would serve everyone, whether young, adult, or elderly. For humans, zombies, and werewolves. Something that would bring them all together without impinging on the lives of others. Then we can come up with other alternatives, Addison decided. "What?" Addison smiled, a spark of defiance in her eyes. "We only have to offer other alternatives to the cheer center. Why not a gym? A place where we could meet up with our friends without bothering each other. And then like that, we could welcome all the generations. We could create special machines for zombies and werewolves that would allow you to test your control without the Z bracelets and train your physical strength and that of the wolves." The more Addison spoke, the more she could imagine it, the more excited she felt. "We could put a little cafe next door, some sort of cafeteria or a restaurant." Eliza was just staring at her with wide eyes in shock. Addison saw her gaze on her and calmed down a bit. "It's a bad idea?" she asked in a small voice. Eliza seemed to snap out of her shocked state and waved her hands in front of her. No, It is an excellent idea. Why didn't I think about it before? She mumbled. It's a great way to break down the wall between generations and between our species. Addison smiled, and the two girls spent the rest of the class planning to make the future building become the sports center of their dreams. She was going to convince her parents to do it, along with the abolition of the anti-monster laws. The class passed very quickly between their planning and their plans, and very quickly the bell rang signifying the end of the class, but not the end of their project. They parted in the hallway, Eliza going to her geography class and Addison heading to the courtyard. She had some spare time before her cheerleading practice at the end of the day, and she wanted to take some time for herself. Even though she loved the cheer, she couldn't help but be nervous about being a captain. She knew she had the skills to do it, but would the rest of the team be willing to change their outlook on cheerleading? She wanted to make it something that would bring people together and not just a way to get even more trophies. But the cheer was so competitive at Seabrook. Addie. Addison turned to see Winter beside her, her head tilted to the side in puzzlement. The cheerleader smiled at her and motioned for her to sit down next to her. Winter gave her a big smile and hurried to sit up, resting her head directly on her shoulder. Addison started scratching her head and let out a chuckle as she felt the wolf's muscles visibly relax. You're stressed, Winter said at last, her eyes still closed and her nose buried in Addison's neck. She sighed and didn't try to deny it. Wolves were able to sense the emotions, thanks to the chemical reactions that take place in the body. Fear and nervousness are particularly recognizable to them. Canine instincts. Instead, Addison buried her head in Winter's hair, inhaling her forest scent. I'm just thinking. Will I make a good captain? Will people be willing to follow me? Will they be willing to make cheering more than a competition up for grabs? I'm just a little worried that Seabrook won't accept my way of seeing cheerleading. Winter didn't waste a second. She pulled away from Addison and took her hands in hers. If someone says anything to you, I will cut off their arm before mixing it to make their family and friends drink it. Then I will cut off their tongue so that they won't be able to say nasty things anymore before I just cut off their head, which I would put in a spade in front of the entrance to the competition hall, so that everyone will be warned that they mustn't hurt my Addie. Winter's brow furrows with a sweet pout on her lips, and Addison's mouth is speechless at her tirade. The wolf ended up lowering her eyes and said in a small voice, "Too much." Addison chooses this moment to burst out laughing, surprising Winter. She was laughing so hard that tears rolled down her cheeks. It was too much, but Addison appreciated the fact that the young wolf was trying to protect her and cheer her up. This method was more violent than the one Wyatt used the day before, but it wouldn't change that for the world. She eventually calmed down, wiping her tears with her finger, before leaning in and kissing Winter on the cheek. It was too much, but it was also what makes you the incredible wolf that you are, and I will not change you for the world. If someone hurts me, I'll let you avenge me yourself, as long as there is no death, okay? At these words, Winter's smile widened and seemed to light up the whole yard. Addison prayed that nothing could ever take that smile away from her, that she would always be this innocent young wolf who loved to scare people but was so caring and wanted to get the things right, even if it was a little awkward. Winter. Willa came running up, a serious look on her face. She walked over to them and ran a hand over both of their heads, before turning to the wolf. One of the were cubs started coughing. Willis came running to tell me, I must return to the den. Can you tell Wyatt for me? Oh, and also take care of Addison for me, will you? Winter nodded gravely, before curling up more against the young girl who patted her head in comfort. Addison knew that for the wolves, their young were what was most precious, because they represented the future of the pack. That one of the pups was sick. She felt her heart tighten and wanted to moan with sadness. Willa turned to her and gave her a small smile. By the way, Addison, they loved your chocolate muffins, and they begged me to tell you that they would like you to make them again. And I admit that I agree with them. Addison smiled a little and nodded before Willa stroked their hair again and left for the forest behind the school. The bell rang at that moment. Okay, that's my clue to go start the training. Before, I need to find Bucky so he can give me the captain's whistle. Will it be okay if you find Wyatt alone, Winter? The wolf looked thoughtfully up at the sky before turning back to Addison with a big smile on her face. It'll be fine, Addie. See you later? Addison nodded and after a final scratch behind the ear, she stood up and walked back inside the school to find her damn cousin. Of course, he forgot to give her the whistle. Addison was certain that if he had the means to be both president of the student council and captain of cheerleading, he would. That whistle was practically stuck to the skin of his neck, and she wasn't even sure he was taking it off to go shower. This whistle was his blanket. She found him in the see-through cheerleaders' locker rooms, looking at himself in the mirror and practicing his signature smile. He saw her coming from her mirror and didn't let her take 2 steps before grabbing her arm and pulling her onto the couch. "Addison, you absolutely have to help me. I can't decide between my super beautiful and talented cheerleading Captain Smile and the amazing, unbelievably amazing cheerleading Captain Smile." He gave her his usual smile with his hands either way, and Addison had to admit that she had a hard time seeing the difference between the two. Except she knew her cousin, and she knew exactly what to say to get him to drop it. "How about the amazing, incredibly handsome and talented cheerleading Captain Smile?" Bucky looked at her for a second, before a big smile streaked his lips. He took her in his arms and squeezed a little too tight for his liking. "Very good idea, Addison. You just saved my career as president." If you hear him, you would think that he was going to pass the elections to become president of the United States, not that of the school. He turned away from her, heading out of the locker room. "Bucky, hold on." His cousin turned a frustrated pout on his face. "What, Addison? Can't you see I'm preparing for my future career?" Addison rolled her eyes. It wasn't like he wasn't panicked, not even 5 minutes ago. "The whistle, Bucky. I need the whistle for practice today." "You want my whistle?" "The one who proves to everyone that I am the captain of the team." The good joke. He laughed too loudly to be sincere, before turning his exasperated eyes to her. "You won't have this little gem until the day you become captain, Addison, not before." He turned to the dressing table that had his name on it and opened a drawer. Addison's eyes widened and had to make an effort to shut her mouth when she saw the 100 whistles it contained. Bucky grabbed one from the stack and threw it at her. "For now, you'll settle for a double," he smiled sweetly before leaving for good without looking back. Addison watched the whistle for a moment, wondering if what just happened. Was Bucky really that obsessed with cheerleading? If that had been the only one he was good at, she would have understood, but Buckley was also one of the best students in high school, and he was a good politician, despite everything she could think of. So why was he obsessed with cheer like that? She shook her head and put the whistle around her neck. She'll think about it all later. She had a workout to do, and she was going to do it right. She ran out of the locker room and headed for the gym, where everyone was already waiting for her. She smiles as she runs towards them. "I'm so fired up to lead this training. I'm sure together we can do anything, and..." She fell silent when she saw the embarrassed faces of the team members and frowned. Were they really that disgusted that she is leading the practice of the day? What if she ever became a captain? Would it always be like this? Before she could open her mouth, she saw Bree point her finger discreetly behind her. She turned back to the stands. No one was supposed to be here during practice, because an accident was quick to happen. She raised her eyebrows when she saw part of the pack seated, watching her. Everyone was looking at her like she was crazy. Some, what came from both sides, making her smile even wider. "I want you to stay," she pointed to the gym and the cheerleading members behind her. "Show me what you can do. After all, cheer is for everyone." She sensed the reluctance from both groups, but only smiled. Wyatt and Winter looked at each other before turning to her, a big smile on their faces. "Why not? We'll show you what our pack is capable of," Wyatt said at last, eliciting exclamations from the other wolves. "Our cheerleading group is not to be taken lightly either, is it?" The screams behind her made her smile, and she took Wyatt's hand, forcing him to walk with her to the center of the gym, where everyone had taken their positions. She let go of him to put herself in front of him, in the center of the formation. "We show you our routine, and we will adapt it later to incorporate you into it. Okay." The other wolves moved behind their beta, who nodded with a small smile on his lips. Addison turned on the music and gave it all. She had fun seeing the astonished faces of the wolves, seeing them fly in the air as if nothing had happened, always keeping a smile. She knew they could hear their hearts pounding from the adrenaline and fear, because one wrong move and it was all over, and must surely be wondering why she wasn't showing on their faces. Why did they keep smiling when they were frankly terrified? The answer? Hours and hours of training and injuries to lose the number. The song ended with the applause of the wolves. Soon everyone started discussing how to make them part of their routine, and very quickly it all took shape. Addison drew on the whiteboard all the steps needed to form a good routine. Wolves preferred to stay on the ground, so cheerleaders will take care of somersaults, but they will still help as bases. Addison was thrilled to see everyone having fun and training as a team. The three races mingled effortlessly, and that was what she had always dreamed of. Allow everyone to find their place within their team, make it a family. She finished with her ending spin and landed in the arms of Wyatt, who also had a big smile on his face. The song ended on the ending tricks, and everyone held their position for 3 seconds before getting up or coming back to the ground and screaming with joy. Wyatt let her down and hugged her, hugging her tight with a laugh on his lips. Around them, she saw Bree and Winter discussing the tricks the first had performed, Matthew and Wiza complimenting Wyver on his sense of rhythm. She saw Rohan trying to convince Willow to attempt to make a figure as a flyer, as the latter stepped back, shaking her head. "A wolf is not supposed to be in the air," she cried. She ends up being surrounded by Ellie and Zoe, who convince her and promise to show her how to not hurt herself. Her cheeks hurt from her oversized smile. "You are all born cheerleaders," she exclaimed around her, pulling away from Wyatt's embrace, who just kept an arm around her shoulders. "It's thanks to you, Addison. You are a born leader," Wyatt smiles. Addison smiled sweetly as she looked down at the floor, feeling her cheeks flush. But a sudden cough saw her lift her head suddenly, and her eyes filled with horror as Winter fell to her knees, held back by a worried Bree. Her necklace had turned a lime green, her eyes the same color. Wyatt let go of her and walked over to his little sister, Winter. Addison saw her shake her head slightly, keeping her gaze fixed on Wyatt. Her stone returned to its translucent white color in her eyes, the chocolate she loved so much, but the cheerleader couldn't help seeing that sick green again. She was about to say something when her cousin came in from behind. "Well done, Addison. What a wonderful way to convince wolves to vote for me in the elections." Addison frowned as Bucky handed out his flyers introducing himself. She couldn't understand why he and Zed were so fixated on what was a school-wide popularity contest. Wyatt put a hand on her shoulder, having sensed her anger. "I don't want to get into your politics, Bucky. Leave me out of it all. I invited them because I happen to enjoy them, and consider cheerleading to be more than winning trophies. It is a question of regrouping, of trust. It is also a question of sharing." Beautiful words, Addison, worthy of the future captain. Addison smiled instinctively, before frowning despite the applause behind her. She couldn't help but think that her cousin was trying to buy it with the spot she had always dreamed of. "Of course the cheer remains what I say it is," finished his cousin before leaving. Addison sighed, lowering her head. He would never understand. This city will never understand. They never saw beyond trophies and banners to decorate their hallways. No matter what Bucky said, if he made her captain, she would make cheer something that unites the world. She felt Wyatt slide his hand from her shoulder to take her hand and bring it back to him. "You're a leader, Addison," she smiled as she heard him repeat the words he had said to her earlier. "You are caring and courageous, and so beautiful inside and out. Never let jealous people tarnish your light, little flower." Addison smiled and blushed at the nickname, which surely had to be attributed because of that floral scent she gave off according to everyone she knew who had an overdeveloped nose. She almost said something when she heard the gym door slam shut. She saw a tuft of green hair moving away from the glass door. Puzzled, she smiled at Wyatt and ran to catch up with the zombie, not hearing the wolf's growl of annoyance and Winter's chuckle. She walked out of the gym and saw him right in front of her. "Zed, what's wrong?" The zombie turned to her, his brow furrowed and his stormy green eyes. "Nothing is right. The campaign is stagnating, and the wolves do not want to fit in and mingle in the crowd. They are interested in cheer," she tried. She knew it was wrong. They were mostly interested in finding their Moonstone, and that was understandable if Winter's condition taught her anything. All that interests them is you, and you are only interested in him. Them. Addison couldn't take it anymore. She didn't understand who that person was in front of her, but it wasn't the kind zombie she had met earlier this year. This being in front of her was bitter and jealous, even though she had never promised him anything. She saw Zed's poster from afar and felt tears come to her eyes when she saw how different he was. She felt like she saw herself before revealing her natural hair to the world, afraid of her difference, stressed that they might think she was a monster, playing a comedy that wasn't her real personality. Do you know how hard it was for the zombies to fit in? And now everything is offered to the wolves on a silver platter. All I want is to give the zombies a chance to feel normal, to be accepted. I'm doing this for my people and for us. For you, so that we can go to the prawn together. They hate silver, Addison answered absently. And that she pointed at the poster is not fitting in. It is hiding your differences. It's being ashamed that you are a zombie. But that's exactly what makes you the super cool zombie Zed. Say the one who has worn a wig all her life. Addison froze and rested icy eyes on her friend. He seemed to realize his foolishness and opened his mouth to surely apologize, but Addison held up a hand to silence him. You're right, but it wasn't by choice, so excuse me for admiring people who celebrate their differences and who have enough self-confidence to know what they are. She planted it there, her mouth open, and headed for the locker room to change. She wanted to get home as quickly as possible and make herself some good chocolate to cheer herself up. Chapter 9. Addison ignored her parents on her way home and went straight up to her room. She didn't want to talk to anyone and just focus on her homework. She fell on her bed and closed her eyes, resting one of her arms on them to cut off the daylight for good, her other hand on her moonstone hidden under her t-shirt. She just couldn't believe it had happened. She couldn't believe Zed could have said something like that when he knew it was a sensitive topic for her. She couldn't believe Bucky could think of the cheer as a great political medium and using it to promote his campaign. She hadn't failed to notice that he and the Aces had landed just after cheer practice was over, as if they were waiting for the right moment to hand out their flyers. Most importantly, she couldn't get a pale, green-eyed Winter out of her head, coughing and falling to the ground. How many times has this happened so far? What about the other wolves? Willa, Wyatt, the pups? Willa had to leave to go help a cub after all. What if it was already too late, and how the human she was could help them? She felt helpless, and would like to have the answer in front of her eyes, a magic solution to solve all her problems. She finally got up with a sigh and got up to take her notebooks out of her bag, looking at herself in the mirror of her dressing table. She touched the moon hair clip with her finger. "Who are you really?" she whispered to her reflection, before turning away. "You are Addison." Addison jumped when she heard that voice in her mind. A voice she hadn't heard for a very long time. She remembered the little wooden house Granny Winona had retired to after the death of her maternal grandfather, against her mother's wishes. "There are wild creatures in the woods," her mother had shouted the day she announced her decision. Granny Winona had only smiled as little 4-year-old Addison ate the candy offered to her under the table. Her mother hated candy and refused to let her daughter eat it, so her grandmother took matters into her own hands. She made sure to keep some stock for when her granddaughter came by and gave them to her secretly under her mother's nose, always accompanied by a wink. "The only wild creatures are those who eat your heart from the inside. Anger, jealousy, fear, envy. They are the real monsters," his grandmother replied. At the time, Addison hadn't understood what she was talking about, but today she could not but agree with her. Her mother had gone in a fury, leaving Addison with her grandmother. She then turned to the little girl, her mouth sticking with candy. She laughed and reached for a handkerchief, which she moistened to wash her mouth. She told her at the same time, "Little Addison, you will meet a lot of people who will make you doubt what you are, who you are, but never forget. Before being a human or a monster, before being a cheerleader, or a zombie, or even a werewolf." She had winked, which made the little girl giggle. You are, and will remain Addison Katrina Wells. You are Addison, and you are the granddaughter of the proud Winona Moonstone. Never let anyone make you doubt who you are." Addison inhaled sharply as the memory faded. She had forgotten. She had forgotten what made her Addison for almost 10 years of her life. And she was just beginning to find out what she could be. But she remains Addison Katrina Wells, granddaughter of the proud Winona Moonstone. She was a cheerleader and hoped to make Seabrook a great place to live, both for wolves, zombies, and humans. She would make the cheerleading team a means of coming together, of sharing and of joy, more than a means of winning trophies that will be of no value in 5 or 10 years. And maybe one day she will find what she really is, but for the moment, she was happy to be her, with her qualities and her faults. She tackled her homework with a newfound energy and a smile on her face, which vanished when she saw the mountain of homework her chemistry teacher had given them. She sighed and started it. 2 hours later, she threw her notebook away from her, a pout on her lips. I don't understand. How can we have exercises so different from theory? She sighed and grabbed her phone, tapping on the Brie icon. She had always been better at chemistry than she was, and she hoped she could explain to her what was eluding her. A hot chocolate will do me good, she sighed, putting her phone in her back pocket. She went down to the kitchen and was not surprised to see it empty. Her mother had a meeting for the demolition of the power plant, and her father was patrolling the streets. She couldn't remember the last time she had dinner with both of her parents. She sighed before taking out the ingredients to make a good hot chocolate with marshmallows, her comfort drink. Her day had been super hectic after all. She could only take one sip before a noise from outside made her jump. She rushed to the door, chocolate still in hand, and swung it open, preparing to have to punch the intruder. But there was nobody. She raised her eyebrows and decided to blame it on a bad joke and was about to go inside when she saw the huge scratch mark on her door. She jumped violently, almost dropping her cup, and decided to get out for good. And there, hidden in the shadows, and saw them. Willa had never looked more serious than now, and that made Addison nervous. Wyatt gave her a small smile, while Winter was begging her with her eyes. Come with us. With us. Despite her initial shock, Addison couldn't claim to be surprised to see them in front of her house. The wolves were desperate, and they needed outside help, even if the help came from a human. And she wasn't just any human. She was the mayor's daughter. She knew everything that was going on in town. She was in the best position to help them. And she was going to help them. She saw Winter and Wyatt looking at each other when she didn't move immediately, and felt Willa's nervousness despite their distance. She took a deep breath and placed her cup of chocolate on the deck chair next to her, before slowly descending the steps to arrive in front of the Alpha. The wolf gave her a small smile before turning on her heel and starting off. Addison followed closely behind, knowing that she was the safest with her. The Alpha wouldn't let anything happen to her, but that didn't stop Wyatt and Winter from standing on either side of her. She smiled at this very clear protective gesture, and had to refrain from shaking her head at their slightly overprotective side. The wolves passed first into Zombie Town, which looked like a fairy tale in all its light. Addison loved coming here at night to watch them and dance to the lights of the little yellow bulbs. But this time they had to be discreet, because someone should not see the mayor's daughter surrounded by a wolf. Knowing Seabrook, they will directly believe that she was kidnapped. Winter and Wyatt held her shoulder and hand respectively, guiding her to make as little noise as possible. Addison was fascinated to see them walk so quietly, never losing their grace. They eventually reached the edge of the forest, and after looking behind them one last time, they guided her into the depths of the woods. They walked for a very long time, the wolves being much more comfortable than her, as she stumbled every 4 steps over a stone. She finally huffed in frustration, her brow furrowed and her mouth pouting, the 15th time she nearly fell on her buttocks. She felt vibrations next to her, and turned to see Wyatt with his face turned away, laughing. She rolled her eyes. She'll make him do a pirouette jump during the next cheerleading session, and we'll see who will be laughing. She didn't dwell on the fact that she had just decided the wolves were going to stay in Seabrook, and just stuck her tongue out at Wyatt. The walk was silent, the wolves having slowed down a bit for her, and her hands and knees were grateful to them. They finally arrived in front of a sort of large cave, surrounded by gigantic stones. "Where are we going?" finally asks Addison. She looked around and thought to herself that the wolves will better walk her home afterwards if they didn't want her to get lost and end up as a moving snack. She would be unable to find the path on her own, that was certain. Willa replied without turning around. Addison's eyes widened. She thought they were going to take her to a quiet place to chat, to invite her to her place. She didn't even have a small present for them. "When we decided we absolutely had to talk to you, the pups begged us to bring you here. They wanted to thank you for the muffins from last time," Wyatt continued. Normally it's a wolf's secret, but we thought we could make an exception for the kindness with which you greeted us. Winter finished. You weren't hard to convince either. Wyvers sneered behind them. That's right, I've never seen the alpha decide something so quickly, Wendy added, walking past Addison, offering her a smile. Addison saw Willa tense up a bit before relaxing, and she smiled, shaking her head. Her fun moment ended quickly when Winter started to cough next to her. Panicked, Addison took her by the arm and supported her as she seemed to want to spit out her lungs. Willa turned around just as quickly and stood next to her. Winter. The wolf shook her head as she recovered. She took her necklace from her free hand. My collar is almost empty, she said in a small voice. Addison felt tears rise to her eyes. She understood what Winter was saying over there, and she really didn't like it. Where is that damn Moonstone at? She refused that her friends could die soon, but if she didn't do anything, that was what was going to happen. Willa glanced at her before picking up Winter and heading for the entrance to the den. The rest of the pack followed her, but Wyatt stayed behind with her. She turned to him. Tell me the truth. How serious is it? Wyatt refused to meet her gaze, but answered anyway. Very. We're not even sure how many adults lasted since last time, and the coughs are getting worse. We need to find it, and quickly, otherwise this pack will be nothing more than a legend. He took Addison by the elbow and helped her down the stones that led to his house. Addison put her own hand over it, both to keep her balance in the dark, but also to reassure him, to tell him that she was there with him, and that she was there with him, and that she was going to help them the best she could. Wyatt seemed to have understood his message, for Addison saw a white flash. She smiled back at him as he let go and walked a bit ahead of her once the floor was flat, and the light shining down the hall. Winter, who was a little further away with Willa, spread his arms with a big smile on his face. The wolf's den. Addison had to blink a bit to get her eyes used to the soft bluish and purple light that lit up the huge room they were in. Stones set with runes were strewn throughout the walls. Her eyes widened when she saw the intricate stonework that gave this place an enchanted air. Wow. It's beautiful, she whispered. Wyatt turned to her and smiled at her. It's normal to be impressed, Winter told her, following them with Willa. The next few minutes were spent mocking Addison's howls, as she tried to speak their language, but couldn't quite manage it. They finally gave up when she made a cry louder than the others, which did not translate to something intended for the most chaste ears. Careful. We have werepups here. He pointed to the wall behind him where all the children had gathered, laughing at her. She has to put a pebble in the swear wolf jar, Winter cried from behind her. Suddenly all the wolves were howling, and Addison hunched her head a little because of her embarrassment and winced. Sorry. Willa wanted to say something, but the pups were faster. They got up from where they were all sitting and ran over to her. Addison soon found herself surrounded by a dozen or so children who didn't reach her taller than her waist, and knowing that she wasn't very tall, that spoke volumes. Are you the human who made us muffins? Asked a little girl whose curly hair was kept in a quilt. Oh, yes. The pups exchanged a look, smiled, and suddenly Addison found herself on the ground, the pups on her, licking her cheek and neck, shouting thanks. It's nothing, really, Addison was trying to say, glancing imploringly at Wyatt. He only smirked at him teasingly, as Winter was laughing to death next to him. The other wolves also let out little laughs. Welcome to the wolf's den, Willow repeated, chuckling. Where everyone ends up in the pup's slime. Addison laughed lightly, nodding her head. Come on, that's enough. Willa stopped with a small smile on her lips. I'm sure Addison fully understood that you like her a lot and want more muffins. They are not the only ones, cried Willie, licking his lips. The other wolves nodded dreamily, again making Addison chuckle as she struggled to her feet now that she was free. I'll bake more cakes, but I'll need to know if you have any allergies. I wouldn't want you to get sick. They all nodded. Addison dusted off her jeans and straightened up completely. Not that I'm not happy to be here. It's really an honor for me. But what am I doing here? And without warning me first, I would have brought back more muffins if I had known. The wolves looked at each other. Wylan hurriedly led the pups away, claiming it was time to eat, and soon it was just the teens around her. Willa moved closer to her. Addison, we need your help. The girl raised an eyebrow. Her friend was way too formal. Of course, what can I do for you? The wolves exchanged a look. Wyatt gave her a reassuring smile as he stood to his sister's right, while Winter stood to her left. What do you know about our history? Willa ended up saying after a moment of silence. This time, Addison raised both eyebrows. Willa knew she knew practically everything, first from her grandmother, then from them. But she couldn't say that. She knew she couldn't say that, but she was also sick of lying. And she was sure her wolves had had enough too. She was about to open her mouth to admit it all, when she noticed something odd. The den was suddenly very quiet. The wolves looked at each other and avoided the gaze of their alpha, who frowned at the very unusual behavior of her pack. Wyatt and Winter also exchanged a puzzled look as Addison stepped back a little. Okay, can someone tell me what's going on? What's wrong? Well, we already knew about Addison's existence, Alpha Wyver said at last. We know she knows us and our legends. The four friends stared at her for a long moment, while her words entered their minds and were processed by their brains. What? The wolves moaned at their cry, the younger ones even covering their ears. Wait, how do you know? Willa asked, pinching the bridge of her nose, feeling the headache coming. Well, you weren't the most discreet when you came back that day from your walk. And then you smelt the human, explained Willie. The elders immediately understood what had happened, but for some reason they didn't say anything. Wyland continued, running a hand through his hair in the stress. They ended up telling us not to say anything and to leave you alone. And then every now and then you could still smell that smell on you, even though it was very faint. My letters, Addison whispered. Attention returned to her, and she smiled. She wasn't going to be impressed by the family of her best friends when she was able to do a reverse double pirouette in the air without being sure to land on her feet. And the little gifts that suddenly appear. Seriously, Alpha, I know we were all pups, but give us a little more credit, Wade added, teasing her lightly. The wolves squirmed a bit, vaguely embarrassed to confess their secret. Willa closed her eyes, while Winter and Wyatt still had their mouths on the ground. Addison shook her head and finally let out a laugh. Willa turned her head towards her, questions in her eyes. No, nothing. I just remember how stressed we were the first day you spent the night with me. In the end, all's well that ends well, right? The wolves looked at her for a moment before Wyatt laughed too. Winter followed shortly after, and soon the entire den was buzzing with their laughter. Willa just smiled and shook her head, wondering if that was her family now. They ended up calming down, and good humor had taken the place of embarrassment. Addison smiled brightly and turned to the pack. I know that I have already introduced myself, but I would like to start again officially. I am Addison Katrina Wells, and I am delighted to meet you. Chapter 10. From then on, Addison felt more like she was at a welcome party. The pups had returned, and each of them wanted to tell her about their adventures in the forest. Addison listened intently, careful to react at the right time. She kept a small smile on her lips, happy to see that despite the situation, they knew how to keep a childish spirit. The teens sulked a little about not having their little human's attention, but they smiled at the energy that the little ones had. Willa had folded her arms, leaned against the cave wall, and looked at her little family. It had been a long, long time since they had been just young wolves of their age, and she loved seeing the smiles Addison put on the lips of her pack members. Oh, can we do your hair? Addie finally asked little Wayla, clapping her hands. Yes. A special wolf hairstyle, cried little Wyle, falling into the arms of the crouching teenager in front of them. He wrapped his hands around her neck, and Addison smiled as she held him to her. How could she say no when these darlings all had huge smiles on their faces? I leave my hair at your disposal. She winked at them, and the pups screamed in joy before running down one of the hallways. She saw Willa stand up from the wall she was perched against and walk towards her. Thanks, Addison. You don't know how long this den hadn't heard such loud, pure laughter. Addison got up from her squatting position she'd adopted earlier to chat with the little ones and gave her a small smile as she put a hand on her shoulder. We'll find the Moonstone, Willa. I can promise you that. The alpha smiled back at her before shifting a bit when the pups came running back, carrying a stool hairbands and a few brushes in their tiny hands. Addison didn't even have time to move as she found herself on the stool, little hands already in her hair. She chatted with Wyver and Willie, the two cooks in the den, about the different ways to prepare meats, and out of the corner of her eyes, she saw Winter and Wyatt approach Willa, whispering something in her ear. It was too low for her to hear anything, even with her very good hearing, and anyway, she didn't want to spy on the conversation, so she continued chatting with the wolves around her, letting the pups do their magic. She saw Willa nod her head anyway, and Winter rushed down the back hall. Sheer. Daishin. It's finished. Addison smiled at the excitement of the young wolves and turned to them. So, how am I? She asked, gently running a hand through the braids she could feel. Very pretty. Looks like a wolf. You just need the fangs and the claws. Addison chuckled at the energy of the pups. They are not wrong, you really look like a wolf, wonders Wyatt next to her. Addison jumped. She hadn't heard him come near her, but she smiled at him when he looked down at her to give her that happy, relaxed little smile that she loves. All that's missing is the clothes, he finished, shifting to show Winter, who beckoned her over. Addison frowned, got up from her stool, and walked over to the young wolf. She took her hand and pulled her towards the hallway where she had disappeared earlier. Where are we going? She asked, looking around. She marveled at the runes that dotted the gray stones. She touched one of them with her finger and let out a little cry as she saw the stone shine a little brighter. Another light caught her attention from her t-shirt. She smiles before continuing to follow Winter into the depths of the den. In my room. We're about the same size, and I want to celebrate your coming to our house somehow. Addison stopped dead. She was the guest, she was the one who should have brought something back to thank them for their hospitality. It was not for them to give her gifts. Winter felt she had stopped a few steps behind her and turned to see the guilty look on her face. Addison saw her frown and came back to her. Addie? Why are you sad? Addison smiles a little, before sighing. I feel a little guilty. This is the first time that I came to your home, and I didn't bring anything for you. And you, since earlier you gave me gifts. The little ones made me a hairstyle that I know is beautiful without even having to see it. And you want to give me your own clothes. I just feel a little embarrassed. Winter frowned a little more before she leaned down to kiss her cheek. Addison let out a chuckle, before Winter took her hand again and pulled her in any direction. We're doing this because we like you, Addison. That's all. We don't need you to bake us cakes or give us gifts. For Willa, Wyatt, and I, you are already part of the family. The pups love you, and the other pack members are grateful for your kindness. Winter ends up turning into a small hallway before entering the third room on her left, hidden by a thick curtain. She turned to her once she was in the center of the room. As long as you continue to have this kindness and respect towards us, you can consider this den as your home. Addison was shocked at the little wolf's determined tone. She meant what she said and wasn't planning on changing her mind. She finally gave her a slightly wet smile, the tears having gathered at the corners of her eyes. Winter ended up clapping her hands. Now that that is settled, let's get down to business. Otherwise the others will accuse me of monopolizing you. Oh, and there is a mirror behind you if you want to see your new hairstyle. The pups did a great job. She turned, and Addison took the opportunity to examine the room. Like the whole den, it was made of stone. Runes quietly shone on some rocks, lighting up the room effectively. On the top of the wall in front of her was an elongated loophole-shaped window, which let in the soft light of the moon. The bedroom had a bed made of furs, the same as she had at home, a magnificent wooden dressing table, carrying a mirror with a gilded frame. On the opposite wall, there was a large hut carved into the stone, surmounted by a few wooden shelves. Winter was rummaging in it, so Addison imagined that was where she put her clothes. She let the wolf mumble under her breath, and walked over to the dressing table mirror, curious to see what the children had done. From the first glance, her breath caught. Her hair was dotted with small white braids, crossed and crisscrossed to form a thicker and more intricate braid. They had tied it all with her own barrette at the base of her neck, leaving her hair loose behind her back. Wow, she whispered. Impressive, eh? We wolves have always had a very special fashion sense, and we love our style, Winter told her from behind her. And you're right. It's amazing. And it's made by kids. Addison couldn't help but touch the small braids at the base of her head and move down to the larger one, feeling all the bends. It's super professional, she finally said, turning to the wolf with a big smile on her face. Winter had yellow jeans, a purple t-shirt, and a fur jacket in her arms, which she handed her. Here, put this on. I'll wait outside while you change. Are you sure, Winter? The wolf didn't give her time to doubt. She put the clothes in her hand and disappeared outside. Okay, she's sure, Addison laughed lightly. The clothes were soft to the touch, and despite their tight-fitting nature, she didn't feel like she was suffocating in them, which was a miracle. The fur on the jacket was warm and as soft as the ones in her house, and Addison found herself stroking them absently. She ends up folding her own things before turning one last time to the mirror. She really looked like a wolf like that. Too bad she wasn't one for real. She walked out of the bedroom to see Winter leaning against the opposite wall, her feet crossed in front of her. She looked up when she saw her coming and gave her a big smile as she jumped up beside her. Wow, you look like a real wolf. You just need a moonstone, and some might almost think you've lived your whole life with us. It does in a sense, right? Even though we haven't seen each other since that day we grew up together, no. So, in a way, I've lived my whole life with you. And for Moonstone, that can quickly be sorted out. Addison smirked as she pulled the necklace out from under her t-shirt, tightening the leather tie so that it fell squarely on the base of her neck. Winter looked at her, her hands pressed together, looking happy. She finally jumped on her, nearly knocking Addison down, and plunged her face into her neck, inhaling her scent. Hibiscus and lilies. It's really heartwarming, she sighed. Addison put her arms around the wolf, holding her to her. The last few days, Winter had really scared her with her cough, and the girl knew she absolutely had to find the Moonstone, urgently. But for now, she was comforting herself by telling herself that she was there, alive and in her arms, safe. She ends up shifting a bit and smiles softly. What if we went back to show the others my superb makeover, in true werewolves fashion? Winter smiled and took her hand, gently pulling it in the right direction until they reached the great living room. The other wolves had started playing with bamboo branches, jumping from hollow to hollow to hollow, waiting for them, but everyone stopped when they saw them enter. Wow. Addison, you're beautiful, cried Warren. The other members of the pack began to compliment her too, causing the girl to blush down to the roots of her hair, but the smile she wore on her lips didn't budge. Really? Yes, you were already very beautiful before, but now, you're sublime, said Wyatt to her, approaching. Addison looked away. The intensity in Wyatt's made her nervous. She folded her hands in front of her, not noticing the look Willa gave her brother. Is that a moonstone around your neck? Wade asked, pointing at the object. Oh yes, we gave it to her in our last letter, Willa explained. The stone was already pretty much empty. We weren't going to use it anyway. Suits you very well, Addie, said Wanda, wrapping her arms around her waist. Come on, let's play. The other pups took her hands and directed her to where the bamboo set was before one of the older wolves could say a word. Willa opened her mouth to protest, but when she saw Addison's beaming smile and heard the children's laughter and cries of joy, she closed her mouth with a small smile. Addison played with the children as Wyver, Wylus, Willow, and Worry opened and closed the bamboo branches, attempting to trap them. The children were screaming as they jumped from side to side. Addison let herself go with them, screaming too, grabbing them, or pushing them gently to throw them off balance. Looks like she's lived her whole life here, Wyatt whispered. Addison smiled at the tender tone of her voice, before grabbing Little was to rest him on her shoulders. He burst out laughing as he raised his arms in the air, Addison continuing to jump between the bamboos, still being careful that the little one clung to her. Eventually the game ended, and the children had to go to bed. Addison was fascinated to see the pups' obedience. Once Willow called them, they stopped, still laughing, before coming over to Addison and hugging her. You will come back? A asked little Wren, seeming to contain her tears as she hugged her. Yes, I promise, Addison said, scratching her head. And you will bring back cakes. The girl chuckled at Wen's innocent question, before nodding. After one last good night, Willow gathered them together and brought them to where she now knew the bedrooms were. Addison sat down on one of the stones, breathless from all the dance and play. She felt more than she saw Willa, Wyatt, and Winter come close to her and sit beside her. She rested her head on Wyatt's shoulder, a smile on her lips. "So that first night with the wolves?" asked Willa. "Unbelievable. I had imagined the scene 100 times since our last letter, but I never could have guessed it." She pointed to the den. The other members of the pack were gradually starting to come near them. She smiled at them from her position before stifling a yawn from her hand. "Sorry. It's been a very long day. But you didn't bring me here to talk about my day, or to play with the pups, did you?" Addison tried to lift her head, but Wyatt's hand stopped her. "You can stay like this if you're tired. Playing with pups is exhausting, we all know that." The other wolves nodded, a small smile on their lips. Willa turned to her, looking serious. "Addison." Her words were cut off by the sudden appearance of Zed, who took the young girl by the hand and literally threw her behind him. "Zed? Stay away, wolves. You really don't want me to become zombies on you." Turning her head, she saw Bonzo, Bree, and Eliza running into the den. "But what are they doing here?" "It's going to end very badly," Eliza mumbled. Addison agreed with her. Zed looked furious, and she couldn't understand why. Suddenly Zed's bracelet fell to the floor, and Addison saw in horror Zed's veins turn black, and his skin red, and she literally jumped at the sheer roar he gave. "He'll wake up the children." "Wolves," cried Willa. Around them, the wolves began to growl, their necklace sparkling with their amber eyes, preparing to attack. She couldn't blame them. An intruder was in their home, threatening them and their families. She would have reacted the same way. She had to do something, and fast, before someone ended up very badly hurt. Willie was the first to charge, but Zed grabbed him and threw him against one of the stone walls. Addison let out a cry of fear, knowing that if she couldn't find a way to calm things down quickly, it was going to end more than badly. She saw Zed's bracelet shining on the floor and ran to pick it up. She heard Wyatt's cry as she walked over to Zed again, but she ignored him for now, placing the bracelet around the zombie's wrist and closing it. Normally she had no problem with him taking off his bracelet to protect himself and those he cared for, but punching before asking questions. It was immature and dangerous. Once everything returned to normal, Addison felt the wolves calm down around them and sighed in relief. She stood in front of him, hands on her hips, very annoyed. "What in the world took you to do that?" She punctuated each word by digging her finger into his chest. Zed didn't even have the humility to look guilty. On the contrary, he stood at his full height. "You were surrounded by werewolves. You were in danger." "In danger? Will I be dressed and styled like this if I was in danger? Did you hear me screaming for help? Have you seen me tied to a pole? Do you see any injuries anywhere?" "Zed, I am here of my own free will." "I told you," said Eliza from where she was. "She was having fun, and she was just chatting. You just had to let your jealousy speak, and you just ruined not only her day, but also her night now. Well done, Zed." "It's my fault," Bree said at last, pulling out her phone. "You sent a call for help, and I panicked." Addison rolled her eyes, but couldn't help but smile. "Haven't you seen the vile emoji?" she asked more gently, pointing to the message. "I needed help with the chemistry homework." Bree turned the phone over to her and let out a small, embarrassed chuckle. "Now I see it. By the way, I love this new style. It looks great on you." Addison smiled at Bree's cheerful look. She had made a mistake, but she hadn't come out roaring, so she forgave her. She knew Bree would have waited until she could talk to her before drawing any conclusions. "It's the special werewolf style. They are very good hairdressers," she joked. "We're also good at manicures," Winter cried, showing her painted claws. The wolves, smiling now that the danger had passed, also showed their fingernails. "So you weren't in danger of death?" Zed finally asks. "No," Zed. Addison sighed. "I was in as little danger here as I am in Zombies Town. We played and we talked, that's all." Zed was about to say something when an earthquake shook the entire den. Addison only stayed on her feet, thanks to her exceptional sense of balance. She saw a few wolves fall to their knees before turning to the watchtower. "Dear Mother, What is happening? Willa asked in a harsh voice. I don't know, but we'll find out right away. Addison pointed to the watchtower through which we could see light shining through the night. Then she ran to the staircase, followed by her small group of friends. From a distance, the power station could be seen lighting up like fireworks. The power plant, Zed whispered. They're probably testing the final charges for tomorrow, Addison supposed. The group looked at the white lights before Eliza sighed. The birthplace of the zombies will be reduced to nothing. Addison put a hand on her shoulder and smiled sadly at her. Even if the plant were destroyed, she will ensure that their project is validated and undertaken. She made the promise to herself. Incredible, eh? A little lime soda with a mysterious energy source, and bam, he startled Winter, who was standing next to him. The zombies appeared. Winter groaned, her eyes and stone gleaming in the dark, and Zed jumped. It's all well and good, but it has nothing to do with us, Willa snapped. Addison winced. Willa and Fear never got along well. Then she froze. A mysterious energy source. The colonists had found a mysterious energy source to power the plant. No, Willa, that has everything to do with you, she cried. She felt the puzzled looks around her, but she was too excited by her discovery to care. A source of mysterious energy which gave its power to the plant. What if it was your Moonstone? It's quite possible, right? That would explain the weird signal I got at the center. It looked a lot like yours, but I didn't think about it more than that. But if something belonging to wolves is in it, then it fits perfectly. Eliza exclaimed. The three wolves looked at each other. She's amazing, Wyatt laughed. Addison, you are amazing, and you just might have saved our lives. Addison only smiled. If what you're saying is true, then we have a chance, Willa whispered, never taking her eyes off the power station. Winter didn't say anything, but Addison felt her hand take hers and squeeze it hard with emotion. Addison couldn't believe it. The answer was in front of their eyes the whole time. Now, the demolition had to be stopped. Chapter 11. Bay. I'm going to talk to my father tonight. I'll ask him to stop the demolition, at least until we can find the Moonstone, decided Addison. Addison, if you do that, you risk getting grounded, Bree worried, encircled by Bonzo's arms. And if I do nothing, the wolves will die. I can survive a week of grounding, but death is still fatal. The determination in Addison's eyes spoke volumes about what she was thinking. Eliza smiled, as Winter couldn't take it anymore, and jumped into the girl's arms. Addison could feel her shaking all over her body, in relief or in fear. She didn't know. She just knew that Winter was among those most affected, and that she was regaining hope. Wyatt put a hand on her shoulder, making Zed growl, and gave her a big smile. Willa still didn't take her eyes off the power plant. Addison, Wyatt will take you home. See you at school, tomorrow. What? We don't need him to, Zed started. Addison freed herself from Winter's arms, keeping a hand around her, and with her elbow hit Zed. Stop talking about what you don't know. There are wild animals that hunt at night, so unless you want to end up as a zombie snack, you'll kindly accept the escort. Willa smirked at Addison's words. Everything she said was true, and she would never risk her friend's life. So even if it wasn't safe, she preferred that Wyatt be tasked with protecting her. She pushed her brother back a little, as far from prying ears as she could. Even so, Addison could still hear them. Watch over Addie, okay? Stay close to her house while she talks to her father. What her human friend said does not inspire confidence. If she needs help, take action, but only if she needs help. Out of the corner of her eye, Addison saw Wyatt's necklace light up, and instinctively she knew that Wyatt had just made a promise to his sister, without saying a word. Addison smiles before shaking her head at the overprotective nature of her wolves. Very quickly, after a few last hugs, their little group headed for the forest in the most intense silence. Wyatt walked a bit ahead of them, leading the way, Eliza just behind to light the way with her tablet. Bonzo and Bree were walking right behind them, talking in low voices, making Addison smile. These two had finally found each other and she was happy for them. Zed was walking beside her, his hands in his pockets, but she could see the look he was giving her every now and then. So, you're a wolf now. What? When in the world did I say I was a wolf? Zed spoke quietly enough that he couldn't be heard over the sound of the wind and the leaves, but Addison clearly saw Wyatt's ears twitching. She smiled, knowing he was listening to her conversation, before sighing. I never said that, Zed, but if I was, would it change anything between us? Would you stop being my friend if I suddenly had fangs and claws? I just don't want you to change, Addie. I find you perfect the way you are now. Addison turned her head towards Zed, but kept her eyes fixed in front of her. Now was not the time to end with a broken bone. Zed, I'm not a doll. I grow and mature. I will definitely change. I'm only 16 and my whole life is ahead of me. Asking me not to change is a bit selfish. Zed was silent. We all have to change for one reason or another. The main thing is to know what is deep within us. Addison gave her a last smile before stepping up to walk beside Eliza. She put a hand on her arm and gave her a small smile. Addison smiled at her before meeting Wyatt's gaze. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes locked in a rare intensity. Addison saw him open his mouth before closing it and resting his eyes on the road again. The rest of the way was done in silence. Once in Zombie Town, Eliza said goodbye and headed for her house. Zed hesitated a moment before doing the same. Bonzo will take me home, Bree said, smiling. She waved to them before taking the hand of the zombie to walk towards his house. Addison smiles at this image. She was happy for Bree. She deserved to be happy. Let's go. She turned to see Wyatt's outstretched hand, who also had a small smile on his lips. She rolled her eyes, but took his hand and let him pull her in the right direction. They left the magical landscape of Zombie Town at night to enter the well-organized districts of Seabrook. Are you okay, Addison? Addison gasped when she suddenly heard Wyatt's voice before turning her eyes to him, still walking. Yes, why? He didn't meet her gaze, but squeezed her hand a little in hers. You left running after training, and then I didn't see you until tonight. And then Zed decided to attack. It wasn't a good day for you, right? Addison smiled a little and stopped, forcing Wyatt to do the same. Oh, she wasn't fooled. If he had wanted to continue walking, she could only have followed him, but she appreciated the fact that he respected her wishes. It's true that a lot has happened today, but it wasn't a bad day. Maybe a good day punctuated by small incidents, but not a bad day. You know why? Wyatt shook his head. Addison smiled and counted on her free fingers. Let's see. I led the cheerleading training and I took the test to become a captain. I managed to get you involved with us. She winked at him. I get to see your home, meet the cubs. I was given a wonderful makeover. And most of all, I was able to help you find your Moonstone. So, yeah, I had a fight with Zed, but it's normal between friends. We argue to force the other to see our point of view, then we reconcile. It's not fun at the moment, but it's necessary to have a healthy friendship. She walked over to Wyatt and took his other hand, resting their forehands on his heart. And the best part is that I was able to find you, Willa and Winter. I'm the happiest in the world right now. She gave him a beaming smile, which Wyatt instinctively returned. He let go of her hands and took a step closer, removing the slightest distance between their two bodies. Addison lifted her head to maintain eye contact, and what she saw in his made her shiver from head to toe. She blushed, not quite knowing why, and suddenly felt shy. Wyatt leaned over her, and Addison closed her eyes. She felt Wyatt's lips on her cheek before he slid down her neck. Instinctively, the young girl tilted her head to the side to give him better access, shivering again. You are cold? Wyatt asked in a whisper. Addison shook her head, unable to utter a word. Wyatt slid his nose against the sensitive skin behind her ear before wrapping his arms around her and hugging her. It was warm, and the fur of his jacket was soft. Addison curled up against him and inhaled his forest scent. She felt good like that, a little drowsy even. She closed her eyes, and for once, let someone else carry her burden for a few minutes. 5 minutes later, they let go, a little reluctantly, but Addison had to go home. Her father was probably already home, and she had to talk to him before he decided to go to bed. Wyatt led her through the streets of Seabrook, his hand still in hers, before he stopped outside Addison's house. I won't be far, okay? If there is any problem, I will intervene." Addison nodded before Wyatt leaned down and kissed her forehead. She smiled at him before letting go of his hand. She ran to her front door and entered as quietly as possible. If her father knew she had gone out, he wasn't even going to let her talk to punish her. Fortunately, he was not in the living room. Addison took the opportunity to walk quickly to her room. She closed the door and changed quickly, making sure to fold Winter's clothes. She kept her hairstyle on. She could still argue that it was a hair experiment, quickly put on her pink pajamas before going down the stairs to the living room. This time she saw her father in the kitchen. "Dad." Dale Wells turned to her, a smile on his face, and flinched when he saw her hairstyle. "Addison, why are you still up? It's late." The young girl crossed her arms in front of her, in a sign of defense and protection towards herself. "I was actually waiting for you. I need to talk to you." His father raised an eyebrow before pointing to the living room sofa, where they sat across from each other. "Go on, darling. I'm listening to you." Addison took a deep breath and closed her eyes. She opened them, a determined look on her face, shocking her father. Since when did her little girl could look so serious? When had she stopped being a carefree young girl? When did she start to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders? Addison could almost read those thoughts in her father's eyes, and the answer was forever. It was not easy being the daughter of the mayor and the head of the Z Patrol. She had built herself a very thick shell, which started the day she had to put on that damn wig and was just starting to break it. "You have to stop the demolition of the Seabrook energy plant." "That again?" "Addison, we've already discussed this." "No, Dad. It's no longer a simple question of aesthetics or whatever. It's a matter of life and death. If you destroy the plant tomorrow, the werewolves will die." Addison didn't raise her voice. She kept her voice even though she wanted to yell at him to stop. But her father was a politician above all else. If he saw any crack in her mask, he would exploit it, telling her that she's too invested or something. She had to be detached for him to listen to her. "It can't be that bad, right?" Addison froze, then glared at him. How could he say something so heartless? It's like he couldn't even consider that the werewolves are breathing beings that have a right to live. She felt her eyes sting with repressed tears and took a profound inspiration to calm herself before starting again, fierceness wrapping her tone. "Dad, would you be ready to have in your conscience the life of a teenager of my age? Children of little Alia's age? Children under 5? Would you be ready to have babies dying on your mind? I will no longer be able to see myself in a mirror if that was the case. If you destroy the plant tomorrow, you will have 100 lives on your conscience. Innocent lives who did nothing to deserve death. Werewolves are bloodthirsty, and yet they are also a family," pleaded Addison, begging her dad to understand. "They take care of each other. They are protectors of their own, and they have been forced to mature and grow too quickly. And when did they do us harm? A week ago, we didn't even know they existed." The history books. There, Addison literally burst out laughing. "Books aren't always right, Dad. You know that history is always written by the winners. The settlers have arrived in the territory of the wolves. Of course they were going to defend their land. We're invaders. Dad, we took their house away from them. And when they tried to defend themselves, they were also robbed of the only thing that would allow them to live. The source of energy that powered Seabrook Power. The one who, with the soda, created the zombies. It was theirs. And it was stolen from them. We stole it from them. And now, because of the decision of our ancestors not to see beyond the tip of their noses, we have the death of an entire civilization on our conscience. How many women and children have died because they did not have their source of energy? How many deaths are we responsible for?" At this point in her tirade, Addison's tears were flowing freely from the corners of her eyes, and she could see that her father was also having a hard time containing his emotions. "I refuse to be a murderer. If I let you continue with the demolition, then I'll be one. Dad, I beg you, don't make your daughter a murderer. And don't make me the daughter of a murderer. Postpone the demolition until their power source can be found and the wolves can bring it home. I ask you as your daughter, but also as a citizen who seeks to protect her family." Addison could see that her speech had hit the nail on the head. Her father was reluctant to answer, which was a first in itself. Usually he always had something to say. He finally sighed. Very well. I will tell the workers tomorrow to shut down the site and defuse the explosives. Afterwards, we all go looking for this mysterious source of energy. Are you okay? Addison gave him a big smile between her tears and threw herself to his neck, thanking him 1,000 times. Her father seemed surprised at this gesture of affection, before wrapping his own arms around her, gently stroking her hair. And now we have to go to sleep. Good night, Addie. Addison smiled. Her parents hadn't called her Addie since her grandmother died. She kissed his cheek before running back to her room. No sooner was the door open than she found herself pulling inside and gripping very tightly. She recognized Wyatt's scent and hugged him back as hard as she could, tears of joy and relief streaming from both of their eyes. You created a miracle, the wolf whispered to her. Addison, you are a miracle. Addison didn't have the strength to answer anymore. She just laughed happily, her heart lighter. Chapter 12. The next day, Addison woke up alone, but ready for this new day. Wyatt had left her yesterday after their emotional moment. He had to return to the den to give the good news to his sister, but he promised to come see her at school. Addison hurried to get ready, but when it came time to get dressed, she hesitated. Could she put on the clothes the wolves lent her, or did she have to put on her usual blue outfit? She glanced at Winter's amber and purple outfit and frowned when she saw a pink post-it hanging over it. She walked over to the hanger that held the outfit and pulled out the post-it to read it. I would love to see you in this outfit again. It looks great on you, Wyatt. Addison smiled, stroking the paper with her finger before sticking it to her mirror. Wyatt must have written it down when he waited anxiously in her room, and she had been far too tired to notice anything unusual the night before. She hesitated for a second before unhooking the outfit from the hanger and pulling it on. There was no training today as they had to prepare the cafeteria for the prawn, so she left her gym bag in her closet. She tied her hair with her favorite barrette and let her moonstone hang in the crook of her neck. That his father didn't even notice it the day before was a miracle, by the way. Then she left her room. The meal with her parents had been disastrous, but Addison just smiled and ate her breakfast before heading to school. There, too, she saw people looking at her strangely, which made her roll her eyes. What? Couldn't she try another style every now and then? Addison, you put on the wolf's outfit. Bree came running up to her and grabbed her arm. Addison smiles at her. I thought this was the perfect opportunity today. I managed to convince my father to postpone the demolition of the power station until the Moonstone could be found. What, you managed to convince your hot-headed father who refuses to be wrong to stop the demolition? Asked Eliza, joining them. Addison smiled and nodded. Eliza widened her eyes and applauded. Wow, well done. It is an exploit. I played on the sensitive chord. Addison let out a mischievous smirk before she burst out laughing with her two friends. What are you laughing about? Zed arrived last Addison and put his arms around her shoulders and those of Eliza. Zed, I managed to convince my father to postpone the demolition. Wolves have a chance to survive. It's awesome. I'm super proud of you. He put his two arms around her and hugged her. Addison, very happy, let him and hugged him back. He finally let go and turned to the other two girls to hug them too. By the way, are you coming to the debate after school? He asked once, having looked around. Of course we'll be there to cheer you on. Addison smiles. It's your big day after all. Zed smiled one last time before saying goodbye to them and running to the auditorium where the candidates were to meet to prepare for the afternoon debate. Addison smiled and turned to Eliza. She opened her mouth to speak to her, before frowning, suddenly feeling nauseous. Addison. Are you okay? Bree asked, seeing her wobble a bit. Her two friends each took one of her arms, holding her upright. As quickly as it appeared, Addison felt better and straightened up on her own. She gave Bree a small smile. Yes, it's okay. It's just the lack of sleep, I think. I went to bed quite late last night. Bree nodded but didn't look convinced. She exchanged a worried look with Eliza before turning to her. Addison smiled back at them, which didn't reach her eyes, but she couldn't worry them like that. Are you planning to come for the search later? She finally asks, heading back to class. Bree and Eliza exchanged one last look before following her. Yes, my probe has already picked up the Moonstone signal. I should be able to find it to guide the excavation. And I asked the Z team this morning by message. They all agreed to come and lend a hand, Bree smiled. Addison's eyes widened at this new information. She knew that humans and zombies were still very uncomfortable with werewolves. A big smile stretched her lips before her excitement finally took hold, and she threw herself into Bree's arms. It's so great. With everyone, we are sure to find it now. Bree laughed with her, and Eliza just smiled. The bell rang and they parted to go to class, the dizziness already forgotten. Addison spent a fairly quiet morning, despite her sudden fatigue which manifested in yawning and very heavy eyes. Several times the teachers had to call her to get her out of her daydreams, and her math teacher, one of the classes she shared with Eliza, even asked her if she wanted to go home if she felt so tired. No, it's okay, thank you, Mr. Kyle. I'm sorry. The professor gave her one last worried glance before returning to class. Eliza gave her a worried look, which she responded with a small smile and a shake of head. It really is not the day to get sick. She had promised the wolves to help them, and she will do it until the end. She will rest once the Moonstone is safely in their den. The midday break finally arrived, but her migraine continued to escalate in intensity, and a weird cough was gouging out her lungs. Addison was at the point where she needed to hold onto Eliza to stay upright. She had closed her eyes to try to calm her dizziness and let herself be guided slowly towards the cafeteria. She didn't feel the wolves arriving and jumped when she heard Willa's worried voice. What's wrong with her? A callous little hand stroked her cheek, and she nuzzled it, liking the pleasant feeling against her sensitive skin. Willa, she's hot. Winter's hand. Addison whimpered a bit as the hand moved away from her cheek. She felt Eliza let go, and she would surely be falling if it hadn't been for another arm to wrap her around to hold her against a warm chest. The smell that emanated from that body was super comforting for her, and she nestled a little more against this person's neck. I don't know, Willa answered the zombie to the question the wolf had asked just before. She was fine this morning, and all of a sudden she started to feel dizzy and feel super tired, like Sleeping Beauty tired. Then she started to cough. And nothing unusual happened between these two moments, Wyatt asked, causing vibrations in Addison's body. So it was Wyatt who was holding her. Addison moaned again and let herself be handled like a rag doll. She had no strength left, and her headache was slowly killing her. Not to mention that itch in her throat, as if she had swallowed an iron spike and it was trying to get it out. She put a hand on her throat, massaging it lightly, trying to make the pain go away. Addison. The young girl opened her eyes to see Willa right in front of her, looking worried, but eyes soft. Addison, how are you feeling? Tired, she whispered. I know, little flower, Wyatt said, gently stroking her back, but Willa needs to know exactly how you feel. Addison closed her eyes again, not even noticing that her friends had led her into the empty women's locker room during midday to sit her on a bench. Or rather, she was sitting on Wyatt's lap, who was sitting on a bench. Migraine. Sore throat. Sore throat. How does it hurt you? Willa squeezed, putting a hand on her forehead. Spike. Tired. She didn't see the worried looks that the wolves exchanged. Eliza and Bree were right behind them, watching them, dumbfounded at the tenderness with which they treated their friend. They had never seen them behave like this with another human. Addison stayed nestled against Wyatt, who continued to run a reassuring hand down her back and through her hair. It can't be, Winter whispered. We would know if that was the case, right? The necklace was almost empty when we gave it to her, and if she had never put it on, Willa turned to Bree, her gaze serious. Bree, have you ever seen Addison with a necklace like mine before? The girl was startled to be addressed so abruptly and stammered a little while answering. I've only known Addison since last year, but I've never seen her with. In any case, not around his neck. Me neither, Eliza added when Willa turned to her. The wolf huffed and turned to Addison. Her gaze moved to where her necklace had been for the last few days, and she cursed as she didn't see it in the crook of her neck. Quiet, Winter. It's no longer there. Her necklace is missing. Maybe that's why she feels so bad. It can't be. Willa without it. I know, Wyatt. We're going to have to find it. Or at least find our Moonstone. Apart from ours, all the extra necklaces we have are empty. Willa. Not all of them. The Alpha turned to Winter, who had lost her somewhat carefree demeanor. She bit her lower lip, thinking. Bree and Eliza followed the conversation with frowns, not quite understanding what was going on. Or rather, Eliza had a good idea, but it was impossible, right? Winter, go get Wylan. Tell her to run to the den and look for the chest, Willa finally decided. Wouldn't it be easier to take Addison to the den, Wyatt asked, not taking his eyes off the girl. Normally, yes, but Addison's under no condition to be moved now, Willa sighed. Sorry to interrupt, but what is Wylan supposed to bring back? Finally asks Eliza. The two exchanged a look before Willa opened her mouth. And think before you tell me it's a wolf secret, growled the zombie. It's one of my best friends who your brother has in his arms, and I would really appreciate it if you didn't lie or hide the truth from me. Willa closed her mouth and raised an eyebrow before letting a smile appear on the corners of her lips. She approached the zombie until their faces were only inches apart. Oh? And what will you do if I refuse to answer? Eliza didn't look down and stared at the wolf without blinking. Last year I hacked Zed's bracelet so he could play football, and I built a whole revolution plan, which was ready to go, and which would have been used if Zed hadn't convinced us to do otherwise. Believe me when I tell you that I can be very, very imaginative and resourceful. It was Eliza's turn to smirk, and Willa imperceptibly nodded before pulling back. She knew how to recognize a leader when she saw one, and Eliza considered Addison to be her family. This protective side was very wolfy, and made her feel a lot of things which she could not ponder now, but maybe after. Wylan is going to grab the only necklace that's 100% charged, she finally replied. It's maybe the only thing that can save Addison now that she no longer has her own necklace. But Addison's not a wolf, Bree contradicts. And since when did she have a Moonstone? Before Willa could reply, Winter arrived, followed by Wylan, who had a wooden chest in his hands. Alpha, are you sure? Asked the latter. No, Wyver, but I can't let Addison die, and that seems like the most logical solution. Winter nodded and opened the chest, which contained a magnificent collar, the leather weaving of which was more intricate than the simple 4 wolves. Willa took the necklace by the links and approached Wyatt. He straightened Addison slightly, who moaned a little at the loss of heat, and pulled her hair up so Willa could wrap the cords around her neck. Once the tie was tight, Willa stepped back and eyed Addison worriedly. Wyatt tightened his arms around her a bit, inhaling the scent of flowers emerging from her skin. Winter and Wylan moved closer, making sure that Eliza and Bree could continue to see their friend. The necklace glowed in a very strong blue light, and little by little, Addison's pale complexion gave way to a little more color. Her cough subsided, but she seemed to be breathing easier. She relaxed against Wyatt's chest, her eyes still closed. Oh my God, it worked, Bree whispered. It can't be. So it's the she-wolf of prophecy, cried Winter. So why doesn't she develop fangs or claws? Wylan asked, tilting her head to the side. Right now, I'm just reassured that she's better, Wyatt interrupted. The rest can be answered after collecting the Moonstone. We would have plenty of time for that when we will no longer be in danger. Winter and Wylan nodded, while Willa just stared at Addison, an indescribable look on her face. She leaned over Addison's and brushed a white strand from her face, ignoring Wyatt's protective growl. Classes end soon. We have to go to the power station. Eliza, would you and Bree care for Addison until she wakes up and explain to her what happened? Both girls nodded, and after a final kiss on her forehead, Wyatt left Addison in the arms of the zombie, who was strong enough to hold her against her. The 4 wolves looked at each other, howled, and ran out. It was time to get back what was theirs.